Thank you very much for all of you that are here. Knowing the incredibly rich content that's happening across all the spaces right now, it does mean a lot to see all of you in the room. My name is Abdul Dalla. I'll be the moderator for this session. And I wanted to spend a couple minutes framing the conversation and why we're all here. For your context, though, I work for an organization called the Center for Social Innovation. For those of you who aren't aware of it, it is a nonprofit organization that is 13 years old. And for this time, we've been focusing on building community and campuses for people who want to make a difference in the world. Much of our work is focused on modeling the world that we want to see. And a core component of modeling this world we want to see is a world where inclusion and diversity are a priority, and of course that everyone belongs. And I specifically, as the new executive director and previously as the director of culture at CSI, have been focusing, if not obsessing, on how do we create working environments and workspaces that are inclusive and diverse, because it is absolutely necessary, fundamental to the work that we do. The framing of this session is a good business case alone sufficient enough to continue our success in the work of diversity and inclusion. And along with my fellow panel in our conversations in advance, we decided it would just be good to state up front, of course a business case is important, but not alone, and that a genuine commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion is absolutely necessary. So in order for us to have a sophisticated conversation, let's get past that first part and get deep into what our successes, our learnings, and our challenges have been in this kind of work. The flow of this will be, I have 3 to 4 questions which I'll be asking the group. And I've asked them all, given the need for us to make sure that we have a good use of time, I've asked them all to keep their answers to within 3 minutes. And that if they do go longer, then I will, as gently as possible, move them on. And thereafter, thereafter that, we really wanted to ensure that there was space for questions and comments, recognizing that there's a lot of complexity and interest in this topic, and there's a lot of subject expertise within the room too. And so we're going to do our best to create space for that. So on the topic of house rules, each answer will be about 3 minutes. If you do have a question to ask, I would ask that you keep it within 30 seconds. And again, if we go longer than that, I'll gently ask you to kind of wrap that up. And then just a couple of pieces on just the energy in the room. Obviously, the topics here are complex, and in some cases, and potentially for some, full of different triggers. Kind of to the opening comment which I made, let's model the world that we want and ensuring that the space is respectful, and that if you do have a comment or a question or something to say, that we do so in a manner that is as most respectful and perhaps loving to go back to the previous conversation downstairs as possible. I also want to acknowledge that there is a spectrum of knowledge on the subject matter. Some people in the room are maybe talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity for the first time, and some of you, for this is your life's work. And it's important to kind of hold space and recognize that there is that spectrum here. And to that point, I also want to acknowledge that on the panel, while there is an incredible diversity of experience and talent and knowledge here, we don't represent all voices. And we recognize that, and we welcome any opportunity for the voices that might not be here to contribute to the conversation. So with that, I'd love the opportunity for the panel actually to introduce themselves and perhaps share what expertise and experience kind of brings them to this conversation. And we'll start to the far right over here with Jennifer Lynn.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to start with gratitude. Gratitude to the Mississaugas of New Credit for us being here on their land, and all the other Indigenous peoples who supported us. Also, of course, to the Japanese Cultural Center and their work in terms of making this happen, in terms of the funds that were provided to establish this, and the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. And of course, all of you. Thank you for choosing this particular room and to be part of the conversation we're going to have now. Before I introduce myself, I'd like to know you a little bit better. So if I could get an idea of how many of you, first of all, have been here all morning. Okay, aren't we the lucky ones? And how many of you have actually been to a CRF event before? Okay. How many of you born in the this country? Okay. And how many of you are proponents of multiculturalism and diversity and inclusion and equity? Okay. Private sector? Public sector? Non-for-profit? Okay. I feel connected to all of you. I've had the privilege of working in all of those sectors. And those of you wearing red, that's my favorite color, so thank you. So those of you, for the benefit of those of you who weren't able to be here this morning, the conversations this morning were just absolutely phenomenal. Deep, rich, and frank. And the most important thing was it created for us an opportunity to really seize those words of Chief Bobby Joseph, when he said, it's a pivotal moment. The time is now. And he talked about reconciliation and how all of us are involved in that movement around reconciliation. It isn't just about our Indigenous peoples. It's about our Black peoples. It's about all the differences that need to be brought together and to become whole, because we are so interdependent and interrelated. So I put forward to you that it's important that we see ourselves and take up that opportunity that was offered to us today about what are we going to do? What are the 3 things we're going to do around reconciliation? And the other piece I'm going to ultimately speak to, and I'll speak to it now, is about the lack of progress. And I'll use that as my introduction of myself. So I'm proud of my immigrant roots. My grandfather came here 105 years ago in search of the Golden Mountain. And he helped to build the railway that connects coast to coast. He was a believer that we should all be working together. And my grandfather, through the Chinese Exclusion Act and through the head tax, continued to see this country as the best place to be for the rest of the generations of our family to be able to thrive and contribute. And so I see myself very proud and humble every opportunity I have to speak with you and share the privileges that my grandfather offered me. And we have now a 5th generation. I became a great aunt this last week. And there are 5 generations now of Lyns in this family. I did say Lynn. Lynn is spelled L-Y-N-N. It's not spelled Lynn, L-I-N. And it's actually not really my last name. Immigration was kind enough when they welcomed my grandfather to change his name and anglicize it. Anglicize it to John Lynn. Well, any of you know Chinese culture, our last name is the most important name. So I actually come from the Jung, J-U-N-G, lineage. And my name is Jung Xiu. And my name in Chinese means beautiful butterfly. And I think to myself, how appropriate is that? Because I have spent my life, whether intentionally or unconsciously, about transformation. And I remember as a small child growing up in a Germanic community. Yes, we ran a restaurant business, whether laundry or restaurant, right? We were a restaurant. And it was really a privilege because we were out to the community centers. People who were coming to this country knew that they could get a hot meal if they didn't have one. If they wanted to wash a few dishes so they could have the pride of making some money and taking it home, they knew it was there. And my aunt taught every Chinese woman who came to the Kitchener-Waterloo area how to sew. Didn't charge them, taught them to sew. And many of them and their generations of families are thriving and contributing to this country. So that's my lived experience. My experience is a lived experience. I think we were also asked to talk about what our expertise is.
And Jennifer, just so you know, you've gone over time. So.
I've gone over time. You will hear about my other expertise as I continue to answer the other questions. This is important work that we all do, and I look forward to doing it with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Next, in the middle of the group, Mr. Michael Block.
So I'll segue off of yours, Jennifer. I'm Michael Block. I'm the founder and CEO of the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. Mine is a lived experience as well as a practical experience. I grew up not very far from where we are sitting today, downtown Toronto, raised by 2 big pot smokers who really raised me to believe that I had a right and responsibility to affect change and to give voice for people who didn't necessarily have a voice. I have the advantage or disadvantage, depending on your perspective, of being a white man. And the consequence of that is I can walk into a room and people will listen to me. Whether I know what I'm talking about or not is irrelevant, but they will listen to me, and I'm able to affect change, and I choose to use my privilege for good as opposed to evil. I'm also gay, and I live with an invisible disability, and the consequence of that is that I have experienced life through a very different lens. In 2005, while working for an accounting firm called KPMG, I wrote the business case for the creation of a role focused solely on diversity and inclusion within the firm, and they mistakenly gave me the job, and I became the chief diversity officer for the firm, and then spent 2.5 years as the deputy chief diversity officer for KPMG International. That piece taught me the difference between the lived experience and the practical experience, and getting things done in what was at the time, and still probably arguably is, a relatively conservative, slow-moving environment. And you could probably describe most of corporate Canada as a slow-moving environment. And my job was to bring them into the 21st century. And I had to take several decades worth of what would be politely described as social activism and adjust that in order to affect change within the corporate world. And that's what led me to start the CCDI and got me to this moment.
Great. Thank you so much.
Great. With that segue, so I am Lee Chalmers, and I am a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. So we've sort of gone down the chain here, and I guess it makes sense that I'm sort of introducing myself last. So I am a partner in the firm, and my focus is in the audit practice. So we talked about diversity of experience, so I'm definitely the newbie on the panel here, but I've been also the Chief Inclusion Officer now at PwC for a year and a half. So I'll certainly bring a different perspective and an interesting perspective of what it's like to be working at from a professional service perspective, what makes us need to change and adapt, and whether that's being a professional services firm where our asset is our people. Our people are expecting us. We see now we are very diverse, but it is about focusing on being inclusive. But we're also getting the pressure and the push from our clients, because clients are expecting this, and particularly in Toronto we see that, where we've had examples where we have lost work because we're not bringing forward that diversity that they're expecting. So I think I'll bring it that perspective in terms of how we're dealing with both of those pressures. And I think, certainly one of the benefits of being at the professional services firm, and a global firm at that, is that we have, territory diversity leaders all around the world, certainly working together trying to address this issue. So hopefully I'll be able to share some of that.
Great. So, I think one of the first areas to start where we talked about was in order to enact change, whether it's in a large corporate environment, a small corporate environment, sole proprietorship, nonprofit, whatever it might be, requires a shift in culture. And a recognition that organizational culture is there and exists, but often hard to make these changes. And so, one of the first starting points, and Michael, maybe we'll start with you, and then we'll kind of snake around this way so everybody gets a chance to start. One of the first questions is, what have you learned from trying to affect culture in terms of what's worked, what hasn't worked, and that could be either from your own examples or what you've seen in other organizations?
Yeah, I think culture change, the emphasis should be on the word change. It's a massive change exercise, change management exercise, and the best of intentions can be in place, but things can go off the rails pretty quickly. And I've seen this in many organizations. We work with over 100 different employers in Canada. where the best of intentions, the plans were in place, but the change management was not properly executed. I think we're now at a point in our evolution in Canada where we're not talking about sort of the blatant racism and sexism and various isms as much as the unconscious bias, the minor's the wrong word, but the small stuff you can't necessarily see or put your finger on. And that can very much get in the way. I think it was honestly, it's easier to deal with a Donald Trump any day of the week, other than he's orange, but because you see him coming. I know what to expect from him. But the subtleties of racism, and Canadians are not, let's be clear, we're sophomore racists. We're very much racist, but it's very polite, we're very kind about it. And we will apologize, but we're still racist. As we saw in a little video out of Abbotsford, British Columbia this week. But it's far easier to deal with that racist tirade out of Abbotsford or this what we're seeing south of the border than it is to deal with that sophomore racism. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I guess from my experience, I took on this role about 1.5 years ago, and I think the thing that I found interesting is when I took it on, we had a series of a partner conference that would involve 500 partners being in attendance, and then we had our local town hall meetings with our 6,000 staff across the country, and I could not get on the agenda. So it just was not a priority. But I'm pleasantly surprised that 1 year later, we had a keynote speaker at our partner conference was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Stephen Robbins. He speaks about unconscious bias, sort of insiderness versus outsiderness, and the impact he had across our partner group was incredible. And then I am now on all the agendas for all our town halls across. I'm attending anyone in the GTA, but we have people all across Canada. So within 1 year, I've noticed a huge shift, and that is all because of the tone of the talk. So to me, that has to be there. I think especially when you're in the corporate world or professional services where you have all these demands, and we were talking about it earlier, the increased pressures, the do more with less. If you don't have the tone at the top, it's very hard to implement change. So I've seen that shift, which has been, I consider, a huge success. And along with the tone at the top, it's about setting clear targets. So our senior partners have come out and said that by 2020, all our partner admits will be 50-50 male-female, which again, no other firm has come out and said that. The thing I find interesting is that by 2020, the current CEO will no longer be there. So we'll see. What the key for us will be making sure we continue that momentum. Exactly. But to me, I mean, this year we have 21%. So, and I may talk about it a little bit later on challenges. We know gender is not the only thing to talk about, and that is one of our struggles. But it's the thing we can measure, and it's the area we know we need to make change, and we're seeing that happening because of that tone at the top and setting those targets and goals. So those are certainly things I've noticed has had a big impact on us this year. So.
Thank you. When people are valued over and above profit, you will then have inclusion. The opportunities exist for individuals to feel that they can have a voice and not only be heard, but be respected for that voice. And something happens once they voice themselves. Then you will have an inclusive culture. And I've been doing this for quite a while. I think I was born doing it. And so I can say to you, gee, I started back in the 1980s with a pivotal piece of precedent-setting work, which was a wake-up call to corporate Canada to say, look at the changing composition of this country, and what does that mean in terms of the talent we're going to hire, and also the customers whom we want to serve. That was in the 1980s, and it showed then that visible minorities would be adding $76.6 billion to profit to our GDP if we were engaged in shift. fast forward now to 2016, where I'm doing a leadership program about having individuals at the highest of levels that represent those hugely underrepresented but talented individuals, those being those from diverse cultural backgrounds, internationally trained professionals, and African. Those people are there. And they can add to your bottom line, whatever that bottom line is. The challenge is that we almost bought into our own beliefs that because we have many organizations being able to receive awards, whether it be a diversity award, I don't want to play them. I've been a recipient of those awards. I don't want to downplay them. They're important. But for many, it's just smoke and mirrors and being able to say, oh, check off the list, we did that. We need to be beyond that. This session is about getting beyond that. So how do we get beyond that? First of all, every single one of you have a voice. And if you're at the highest of levels, then please make your voice even more loud. And make sure that it cascades up and down constantly. It vibrates. It doesn't just hang at the top and doesn't just get stuck at the bottom. It's constantly in rotation. And find ways to do that within your own organizations. And then hold yourself accountable by stating what you see as being the impactful, and I emphasize impactful and measurable results. And then better still, so that we get that multiplier effect, is don't just create your own standards of how you're going to measure. Do it amongst and beyond yourselves. Do it with your industry. Do it with your sector. And then let's do it with all three legs of the stool: private, public, and not-for-profit. How am I for time? Okay, so whatever measures you put into place, they have to have teeth. And those teeth have to be able to be activated right away on the spot. Don't let someone who feels like they've been discriminated against or wasn't given an opportunity or wasn't heard, that they're going to have to go through an arduous and stressful process and then find out, you know what, sorry, I can't do it. Or leave in the process of it because they are so damaged and hurt by it. That's not reconciliation. That's not progress. That's not what we're looking for, right? So not only that, but each and every one of us have the opportunity to take ownership. Ownership at every level of the organization. And create strong policies, practices, and processes that hold you accountable. And then you'll be able to see some inclusion.
And maybe can I just jump in there? I think one of the things that Jennifer said at the beginning I thought was interesting is the comment about, you know, when people feel valued beyond profit, that's when we have inclusion. And I think for us at a firm where obviously we're always focused on profits, I think that is so important, and we're seeing it today with the millennials where, you know, our firm, 80% of our employees are going to be millennials in the next few years. So we're seeing the attitudes, you know, when they arrive at the corporate world, they're expecting to have inclusion. They've sort of grown up with inclusion and haven't necessarily felt the barriers. To come into an organization that aren't embracing that, we're going to certainly lose that war on talent. So I think that's why for us that is so important, is, you know, how do we engage people, how do we get the best out of our people, and it is all about that concept of inclusion and being aware of those biases. So that really resonates.
I would only emphasize that this effort is a journey. There's no end point. It will keep going on. The most important thing is, and the way to test this is, when the senior leadership of an organization moves on, does diversity and inclusion continue to be a top priority because it is so entrenched in the organization? Does the leader of that organization continue to champion it? And continue, more importantly, to invest in it? It's one thing to say you're going to do it. It's one thing to have those wonderful policies on the wall, but at the end of the day, if you're not giving the resources, human and financial, to allow it to actually be embedded and see beyond your organization to the greater good of the society, then it's not inclusive.
Well, I would think success for our organization is when I don't need to be in this role because it's just happening naturally. So that's what I'm working for. What I'm working towards is getting rid of my role and having it just be embedded.
And yeah, I think to your point, like, the journey never ends. And so, and it's a long process around reconciliation, and it'll be a long process going forward. But I want to speak to both of you. Kind of jumped on what our next question was around success and how we know we're succeeding. Leah, I think you'd be the first one to go and then come back to Jen.
Sure.
How are you defining success at this point beyond what you were saying?
Yeah, so I guess for us it was about getting the buy-in from the top, getting the tone from the top, and being able to resonate our message throughout so that people can start to live and breathe it. We've set targets, so I think that will help us measure success. So we're not there yet, but so far for me it is about the conversation, and it started. And I think it's also seeing how things are going to trickle up from the grassroots. So today we have what we call employee network groups around sort of key groups that have come together on a common interest. So whether it's our lead group, which is our gay, lesbian, and everyone else, or it's we have a Black professionals group, Latin American group. And these groups have been formed because our staff have said they want these groups. They've come together and they're working with the markets and our clients and creating events where they come together. So to me, that's success, where we continue to do that and we see it bubbling up from the bottom up. And another area we're seeing a lot of sort of discussions is around men advocating for women. So men coming together and saying, how can we support our women? How can we sponsor key people, make sure they get put in the right roles? So I think to me we're starting to see that, and I think that is a sign of success.
When every single person in this room or in the workplace feels that they have access to power and privilege, we will have success. How does that happen? What does that look like? What it looks like is in the executive suite, the CEO, people like you and I are occupying those positions. And as the mention was made earlier today with the panel, there are, the government spoke about parity. One woman said, there was no parity there for the Black women. So it's not just about making sure you have one of, making sure you have the best of. And many of the best of, represented like here in the room, are not there. And so that means hiring practices need to be looked at. Recruitment and retention practices need to be looked at. And at the end of the day, investment in those individuals. Number one, identifying those individuals without the filters that create unconscious or conscious bias. Secondly, then making sure that those individuals have the opportunity to have leadership development and mentors and sponsors. And I have great respect for sponsorship and mentoring, but I can say to you that in organizations that I've worked with and familiar with, and the research that we've worked with, is it depends on whether someone wants to mentor you or put their hand up to sponsor you and tap you on the shoulder and say, I've got your back. Well, I'm sorry, a lot of people don't have their back covered. And so while all of these practices and programs are in place, they're not being executed in the fullest and best way possible so that the talk that is happening is actually doing the walk in the right direction. The other point I would make is that the message that we can't find them. We can't find them. Yeah, can't find them. In our BOLD program, Broadening Opportunity Through Leadership Diversity, I want to tell you what our cohort looks like. 10% are born outside, 40% are born outside of Canada. They speak 14 different languages other than English. They come from 25 different cultural backgrounds and multiple lineages. They have been, 22% of them have been educated outside of Canada. And 50% of them have worked in another country, actually 26 different countries. Those are the people that are right here. And they're in a program about advancing them into leadership. So when we see that change happening at the highest levels, and it's sustainable, then we will know we have success. How am I doing?
That was it. That was perfect.
Right getting better. Okay.
Thank you so much.
How do we know when we've been successful? So I'm a big numbers guy. I'm not an accountant. but I spent a lot of time with accountants, so it kind of rubs off. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how do you know when you're successful. And part of it is the diversity side of the house. Part of it is the demographics. I think to your point, Jennifer, though, we tend to compartmentalize people when it comes to demographics. So yes, the Prime Minister had gender parity in his cabinet, but we didn't think about the other aspects of diversity in that conversation. And it is 2016. We could have done better in that. And that's a conversation for another day. Demographics are just numbers, and they just tell you who your people are. The other piece is the inclusion. How do people feel in their organization? And yes, it is about what the top of the house looks like, and do people have the opportunity to succeed, and that's really important. But you need to measure how inclusive your work environment is, and there's a number of ways you can do that. We spent a lot of time doing this with our partners, by running surveys and then looking at different demographic groups to better understand if there is a different experience for people from different racial backgrounds than their Caucasian peers, for people with disabilities than the able-bodied. And then you have to dig into that, because again, it's just a number, but you have to start to ask questions and have conversations. And when you start to see all those numbers balance out, that's when we're going to be successful. I think the third point, though, is when we have leaders who are bold and brave, like Bill, the CEO, senior partner, of PwC, who says, we're going to do this. We're going to set some targets, some numbers. These are not going to be easy to achieve. 50% is a big fat number. But setting that number and then putting in place plans to achieve those numbers, because you can't just set the number and then hope. That's really success when Bill is a straight white, able-bodied, middle-aged man recognizes that the future of the firm is in diversity. It's not about the right thing to do. That's not something Bill would say. It's about how are we going to make sure we remain relevant.